Our guest this week is none other than Robin from Liquidium. I got to first meet Robin back in the day through Bitcoin Startup Lab, and that's where I was introduced to Liquidium, one of the great success stories from there. And you guys have really done a lot, so much since then. So I guess without further ado, Robin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yep, thanks for having me. Hi, I'm Robin, CEO and co-founder of Liquidium. And I'm happy to talk about Liquidium, how we got into the space, what we think about Bitcoin DeFi, and why we think it's important.
Awesome. So what got you into Bitcoin originally?
Good question. So I was always into finance and loved just trading stocks and investing in companies that I liked and so on. And then I stumbled upon Bitcoin, and that was the first time where I had this realization: this is not just a company that you can invest in, but it's actually almost like a network or a framework or whatever you want to call it, or like an asset class even, that you can invest in without needing something like an ETF or something like that. But it's like a much broader thing than a company. Instead, it is something that actually companies can build on top of. It's almost like if the internet back in the days had a coin, because Bitcoin is kind of like the new money, and it's basically a way of I guess Bitcoin is more than just like a single thing. It's like a whole asset class and a whole network that companies can be built on top of, and technology will be built on top of Bitcoin. What we're seeing now, and that whole thing really got me deeper into Bitcoin, and also got me into researching other cryptocurrencies. But at the end of the day, I resonated most with the idea of Bitcoin because it was so decentralized, because it wasn't connected with a company or with a founder or anything like that. I mean, obviously there is Satoshi Nakamoto, but who is Satoshi Nakamoto? I'm Satoshi Nakamoto.
We're all Satoshi Nakamoto.
Exactly. And that's what I mean. That's the Bitcoin spirit, and it's really like an unstoppable force. There are countries that made it a legal tender. It's just such a broad movement that is very, very different from anything else. And I think that's what makes Bitcoin extremely interesting.
So one thing that I've really admired about you is I feel like you've caught on to trends pretty early. And one of those trends was ordinals specifically, and runes, I guess, but ordinals and runes. So can you give maybe a background a little bit about ordinals and runes, and also what made you jump into that head first?
Yeah, so I guess as I just said, I was very intrigued by Bitcoin and sort of like the whole idea of it being super decentralized and just the ethos of Bitcoin itself. But then at the same time, I was also looking at other cryptocurrencies and other networks like Ethereum, like Solana, and so on. Actually also bought Solana at 20 cents or something like that, and then sold it at $1.30, which was stupid. But the idea of Bitcoin was amazing, but then also at the same time I understood how Ethereum and Solana and so on are super appealing, because it just makes building on it so easy, and you can have other assets on these chains, not just back in the days with Bitcoin, you just had Bitcoin on Bitcoin. But obviously for a healthy financial ecosystem, you need various asset classes. And that was the appeal of Ethereum and the ability to build very easy on it. Sorry about that. And
no, good.
And therefore, sorry about that. Sorry, let me recollect my thoughts. So yes, Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then so then I thought okay, but Ethereum is not Bitcoin and doesn't have the same ethos as Bitcoin, so we need that functionality that we have on Ethereum, we need that on Bitcoin too, ideally. Like, I want to use Bitcoin, but I want to build applications with it. I want to have alternative assets, but I want to use the chain Bitcoin. That's kind of like the whole thing. And then I started researching like essentially blockchains or networks or whatever that try to kind of like realize that. And that's when I got into Stacks, which was like, they had the idea of, we want to tie a programmable blockchain as close to Bitcoin as possible. That was, I think, a good step and a good thought, because the community was very Bitcoin oriented still. And that's where, I guess, my journey as a builder started. Bitcoin NFTs were a thing on Stacks. I guess it was just Stacks NFTs, but always like with that narrative of being close to Bitcoin and kind of like tapping into Bitcoin security. Then I started this NFT lending business on Stacks. That was the first NFT lending platform on Stacks, and it was right around the time where also the first NFT lending companies were starting on Ethereum. While I knew Stacks was not perfectly Bitcoin, I still wanted to kind of like build this thing. And then February of 2023, I still remember when my co-founder and CMO was in a Discord channel where it was called Bitcoin Rocks, and people were trading these Bitcoin Rocks for a lot of money over counter through Discord with Google Sheets. And then he told me about it. We were looking into it, and that's when we realized, okay, this is like, we're in an absolute bear market, but there is a new asset class coming up that is actually directly on Bitcoin, and people are trading it in a bear market over the counter. Like, that is obvious product market fit. And that is exactly what I wanted to have, right? Like, essentially other assets on Bitcoin. That was kind of like the point where I was just like, okay, let's go all in on this new thing called Ordinals, and let's rebuild our entire stack on native Bitcoin using PSBTs, using DLCs, and so on. So we started like researching the Bitcoin layer 1 technology, and then built kind of like the first version of Liquidium. Started building that in February of 2023, and then ultimately launched it in July of 2023. I think that we were one of the first Bitcoin DeFi companies, if you want to call it that, because it was kind of like the first time that you could actually do DeFi on Bitcoin. Because how do you want to do DeFi if there is just Bitcoin, right? Like, you cannot borrow anything. You cannot borrow Bitcoin against Bitcoin. I guess technically you can, but why would you? And then also like why would you trade on Bitcoin if there is just Bitcoin? Like, what would you want to buy with your Bitcoin if you can just buy Bitcoin for Bitcoin? So there was no application for DeFi on Bitcoin, and suddenly with Ordinals there was a different asset class, and Bitcoin DeFi was kind of a possibility and an actual use case. And that's how we sort of got into the Bitcoin DeFi and the first version of Liquidium.
So why did you end up landing on BorrowLend as like the product that you ultimately wanted to build? Like, when you were out there, were you hearing from people saying like, oh, I want leverage, I want looping, like what about Bitcoin DeFi made this the obvious candidate for a product to build?
Good question. So obviously, because already we kind of like did NFT lending on Stacks, I think lending is something that is absolutely essential for a healthy financial ecosystem. Lending has existed in traditional finance for probably thousands of years, like ever since finance probably even before the days of finance, people were borrowing something or lending something, and lending has been a key like component of just economics, and it is absolutely crucial for a ecosystem to have like liquidity, for people to have assets, keep holding on to their assets, and then kind of like leverage the assets that they have to buy more things and so on. And then at the same time, people want to get interest, and the only, well, maybe not the only yield, but one of the few only ways to generate yield, a real yield, is by lending out something to somebody else and collecting interest. Therefore, like, because I always compared NFTs to digital certificates of ownership, and at the end of the day, everything that you are borrowing against is mostly a certificate of ownership, be it a certificate of ownership for your house or for your car or whatever. So why not borrow against an NFT? And yeah, we started that on Stacks for these reasons. And then on Bitcoin with ordinals, at the time we started, there were no marketplaces, there was no wallet. So yes, we could have shifted our business over, but we thought, let's stick to our guns. Let's stick to what we already know, first of all. And second of all, we were a team of 3 people with one single engineer, our CTO. And we knew that if there is any company interested in ordinals, they will build a wallet or a marketplace. And as soon as we're going to kind of like fight against companies with a much bigger team, there is no chance that we will be the first ones to build a marketplace, or we will build the best marketplace, for example. And we knew that eventually there will be marketplaces, and once there is marketplaces and wallets, the next step will be lending. So we kind of like thought, okay, let's stick to what we know, and let's stick to what is going to come eventually anyways after marketplaces and wallets have been adopted in the space.
Interesting. It's to your point of lending is necessary for a robust financial ecosystem. I feel like that really was like the foundation of finance in general, was credit markets to a degree, or pools of insurance, and just figuring out ways to finance like a venture or a business that they ultimately wanted to do. So I feel like it's different with crypto a little bit, right? Like,
I mean,
crypto,
it's currency, exchange, and lending. Like, these are the 3 core pillars. And currency, we already have. We have Bitcoin. Exchange, that's coming always. People will find a way, even if it's just OTC. And then lending is kind of like the third piece that always follows after the currency and the exchange.
But I guess with crypto, so far with lending, I feel like it's pretty degen, right? Like you're borrowing to loop and leverage, right? So you can continue doing more. It's a bit of a circular economy. However, I do think that's just like the first iteration, where the first iteration of any major technical innovation always starts with this like sort of niche, ultra niche market, and then expands to something a bit bigger. I think you're seeing that too, right? Like I love what you guys are doing with Liquidium Fi, but maybe just touch on that. Like what are people actually currently doing with Liquidium? Congrats on surpassing I think over $500 million in loan volume. That's incredible. 100,000 loans too. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think we're at 110,000 or something like that right now.
Yeah. But who's counting? 110. No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, that's awesome. So what are people doing? Why did you really find product market fit here? And then what do you see as the next iteration?
Yeah. So I guess to your question about like what are users doing, and is it a circular economy? So I guess the answer to the question, if it is a circular economy, I guess the answer is yes, because sort of like there is currently that ordinals and rune space in our case, or if you think broader, like Aave, for example, there is the crypto space, and obviously like kind of like money rotates within the crypto space. And that's the reality even for TradFi. Like within TradFi, probably the majority of loans are kind of like always done by the same people. It's always like money looping through banks and so on and so forth. There is only so much money in the world. I mean, the Fed keeps printing, which is not good, but everything is kind of like a circular economy. You give me money, I give you money, the money stays in the system. And it's similar in our case, where obviously a majority of our users are users that have been using the platform for a while and keep returning and keep borrowing more, or keep lending more. And in terms of the use cases, that like what do people do with it, there is kind of like two types of people, and I think the most like simple one to describe is actually the same person who would also borrow in real life, which is somebody who has a lot of assets and they don't want to get rid of their assets, but they still have expenses to make, or they see opportunities where they need money, where they need liquidity so that they can do something. Imagine somebody who has a house, and I'm not talking about a house with a mortgage, but somebody who like owns that house fully. But they need, for example, they see a business that they can invest into, or they need some sort of liquidity for whatever it might be, but they don't want to sell their house. They can easily borrow against their house without selling their house. And now they suddenly have liquidity available that they can play around with, ideally make that money that they borrowed to more money, and then repay the loan and keep the profits. And that's what we're seeing in a small scale as well on Liquidium, which is people who have ordinals or runes, and they don't want to sell their ordinals and runes because they want to keep holding them, because they are collectors, or they think the price is going to go up over time, or whatever it might be. But they still want to participate in Bitcoin DeFi, in, for example, exchanges or other opportunities that they see in the market. So now they're actually just borrowing against their ordinals to get Bitcoin, and then they can use that Bitcoin freely for whatever they want. We have people who are like just using their Bitcoin to buy more ordinals or to buy more runes where they think these runes or ordinals are going to pump, or they might be sending that Bitcoin to a centralized exchange and then kind of use perps there. Or they bridge it to stacks and then have SBTC and then trade on stacks, or whatever it might be. There is a lot of like different types of users that just use it to get liquidity and to participate in the market. And then there is another category of users, which are people who are actually borrowing to hedge their risk. These are people that basically they want to borrow at very high loan to value ratios. And then in case the collateral, in this case the ordinal, is going to drop in value, they are not going to repay the loan and they keep the Bitcoin. So our loans on Liquidium WTF, which is that ordinals and runes lending protocol, have two outcomes. One is you repay the loan on time and get back your collateral, or you don't repay your loan, which means your loan defaults and the lender gets the collateral. So there is a lot of people that borrow in order to hedge their positions because they might expect a market drop. And if so, then they can kind of like default on the loan, keep the Bitcoin and buy back the asset cheaper. So now they basically made a profit on the loss that the ordinal had, which is a very interesting way of almost like shorting ordinals. And lenders are also mostly happy about that because lenders at most of the time are actually people who are collectors and they want to get the ordinals that they're lending against. So these are kind of like the two classes of borrowers and lenders. It's very diverse, I would say, and that's also the beauty of this product. Is it's very simple in its core mechanics, but people do a lot of different things that with it that I didn't even expect them to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like the de-risking the shorts on the borrow end. I personally haven't done it, but I certainly I bought all over the place in the ordinals market. So there's some ordinals that I own where it's like, that would have been nice. Probably should have.
I think just to the point of like why is lending healthy for the market is also like something I can actually explain with an example. So when in the early days of ordinals, when there was only so much liquidity in the ordinals market, there were some collections that came out that had extremely high mint prices. Say, for example, all of the OMB drops, or I think there was something called Ink, which kind of faded away over time. And then obviously Taproot Wizards and so on. These were collections that had a lot of pieces, 10,000 pieces or something like that, and then a very high mint price of even something like 0.2 Bitcoin or something like that. So if you think about it, like 10,000 ordinals at a price of 0.2 Bitcoin, that's like that's a lot of Bitcoin right there. That's like 2,000 Bitcoin. And obviously sucking 2,000 Bitcoin out of the existing ordinals market just doesn't work. People need to sell their ordinals in order to get liquidity.
To be able to buy,
if you want to have 2,000 Bitcoin worth of liquidity from the market, people need to sell. And that's where Liquidium comes in, where basically if there is a mint coming up with a very steep mint price, people are not selling anymore. They're borrowing against their current assets. And therefore, it's kind of like protecting the rest of the market, because it doesn't mean that if a new collection comes up, all of the other collections are tanking. But instead, more people are borrowing and buying the new collections. And we have seen that in our charts. Like, you can look at our analytics, like every time there was a huge mint, basically borrowing was spiking on Liquidium, and people were just loading up on liquidity against their existing ordinals to get into the mints, to flip them, or to kind of just ride the wave or hold them or whatever they might do with it. But it's a healthy way of protecting the market, where you're not kind of like letting the whole market tank because there is too little liquidity in it.
Yep, that makes sense. So now jumping to what's happening in present, like macroeconomic conditions, we're seeing treasury companies pop up left and right. So there's traditional corporations that are loading Bitcoin onto their balance sheet. Normal companies as well are just loading Bitcoin onto their balance sheet. You see this across MicroStrategy, GameStop, and it's become an investable asset class for a lot of people, especially with the regulations and the crypto-friendly administration that we have in the United States. So that being said, I think there is there's now what's happening is people are custodying Bitcoin, and they're gonna want to do stuff with it, which I do think is a big unlock for borrow lend going forward. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I know you guys launched Liquidium Fi. What was the purpose of Liquidium Fi, and what do you see? How do you think Liquidium gets involved in this market?
Yeah. So just to clarify for anybody who isn't too familiar with Liquidium, we do have like Liquidium WTF, which is our Ordinals, Runes, BRC20 peer-to-peer based lending product, which we have had since 2023. And Liquidium Fi, as you just mentioned, is our upcoming cross-chain lending platform. And what it does is essentially it allows you to borrow any asset from any chain against any asset on any chain, including native Bitcoin. And that's kind of like the core unlock that we see is an Aave style lending protocol where you can use your native Bitcoin as collateral and then borrow assets on Ethereum and Solana and so on against that. And I think what you just said is a great point. Like, yes, Bitcoin treasury companies are absolutely a possible user base for us, because they are sitting on a lot of Bitcoin, And them being sort of like Bitcoin maxis, they probably don't want to like bridge their Bitcoin to Ethereum and then wrap it there with a centralized solution, and then get wrapped Bitcoin and then use that.
Yeah.
Instead, they kind of like want to keep their Bitcoin ideally in a non-custodial wallet or some sort of like multi-sig, or even if it's custodied, like you kind of want to keep it in Bitcoin and not necessarily be exposed to a wrapped version of that. And what Liquidium Fi does is that in Liquidium fashion, you can use your native Bitcoin to use Bitcoin. So you just connect your Bitcoin wallet, which is a ledger or Xverse or whatever you might have for where you store your Bitcoin on, and then you can just like supply the Bitcoin as collateral there, and that actually yields or like earns you yield on your Bitcoin, because supplying your Bitcoin essentially means that you're lending it out, but it's also available as collateral then. So you can earn interest on your Bitcoin, and at the same time you can borrow other assets against your Bitcoin. And right now the unfortunate reality is still that the most used stablecoins are USDC and USDT on Ethereum. We don't have such an equivalent on Bitcoin yet. There are a lot of companies that are building stablecoins on Bitcoin. I think that's absolutely amazing, and I'm standing behind all of them. But right now it's just like, if you're thinking about, I want to actually spend money, then you have banks that support USDC deposits. You do have Stripe, which allows you to use USDC on Solana from your Phantom wallet to actually pay in pretty much every single web application that uses Stripe. And like Stripe has like an 80% or even more market share amongst payment processors. And it's just USDC and USDT are so widely adopted that if somebody has a lot of Bitcoin and they don't want to sell their Bitcoin, but they still need liquidity for anything, be it opportunities or just expenses, or even emergencies or whatever it might be, we want to give them an option where they can get liquidity very quickly against their Bitcoin without needing to kind of use centralized solutions or wrap their Bitcoin or bridge their Bitcoin or anything like that. And yeah, so same again, like if you look at TradFi, like this is a common practice that people do if they have stocks, for example. Like somebody like Elon Musk, who has billions of dollars in like net worth, he doesn't have that in cash in his bank, right? Most of his money is locked in Twitter shares, in Tesla, and in SpaceX, and that kind of defines his net worth. And what he does is, also in order to save taxes, he doesn't take like a massive salary probably, he's just borrowing against his existing assets. And that's the same thing for Bitcoiners. Like Bitcoiners don't want to sell their Bitcoin in order to get liquidity. They want to keep holding on to their Bitcoin, ideally get more Bitcoin, and still have liquidity that they can spend on a daily basis. And that's basically what Liquidium Fi is.
Okay, great. And so, and this is from my understanding of Liquidium Fi, on the back end, you guys are working with ICP, which is fantastic. It's every time I've chatted with the ICP team, I'm more and more impressed about. I feel like they're so technical. They have like really strong research teams that have built an incredible product. But it basically makes it so you can interoperate across various chains and across DeFi at large. So you could deposit Bitcoin, or you can work with an ICP vault for your Bitcoin, but then you get stables on another chain. So you get stables on, like, let's just say Ethereum per se. Then from there, maybe you transfer to an exchange or some other way to off ramp, and then boom, without selling your Bitcoin, you get cash. Is that what you guys are currently seeing as the big unlock or use case on Liquidium Fi, or do you think there's also something that you guys can do natively with institutions that you're really looking forward to?
So I guess, yeah, first, like, yeah, ICP, like, I think you kind of need to differentiate between like ICP, the blockchain ICP and then something called chain fusion, which is a technology of ICP. I think right now they're not doing the best job to separate that branding, to be quite frank. And yes, as you said, they're a highly technical team. They are incredibly smart. They have incredibly good research, but I think they're kind of lacking the marketing aspect, which is interesting. But they're building phenomenal tech. And chain fusion essentially is that thing where you can build a smart contract that essentially executes transactions on the native chains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and more. So you're kind of like building that one smart contract that can talk to every chain and that can actually execute transactions on there. We're already using that with Liquidium WTF actually, and in the form of something called instant loans, where essentially you're putting BTC into a, we call it a vault, which is your own vault, and it's a 1 out of 2 multi-sig, which means you have one signature over the vault. You can always withdraw money from there, and then the other signature is from the ICP canister or the ICP smart contract that can actually execute the transactions on Bitcoin, which means the loan process is fully on-chain, fully on Bitcoin, and no transactions happening on ICP, but sort of the logic is on ICP using chain fusion. And that's the same thing that we're using for Liquidium Fi, but instead of just using Bitcoin, we have that contract deployed on Ethereum, Solana, and Bitcoin, and the chain fusion contract kind of connects all of these chains together and lets them talk to each other, which I think is very interesting technology, and it brings a lot of unlocks, like, for example, what we're building now. And in terms of the use cases, yes, I think like one natural use case is obviously people getting liquidity against whatever asset they might have already, or people that just want to play around in, for example, a different ecosystem. Like if I take myself as an example, I don't have a lot of Ethereum, I don't have a lot of Solana, I do have a lot of Bitcoin, and I don't want to sell my Bitcoin just because I see something happening on Solana. But sometimes I still want to use Solana applications. So I would just use Liquidium to borrow some Solana against my Bitcoin, and then I can use the Solana to play around on Solana until I'm done doing whatever I did there, and then I can just repay that loan and kind of like keep my profits and get my Bitcoin back. So I think
hopefully profits.
Hopefully profits, yes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like one strategy that I also see with this. I guess one more real life application that I kind of want to see with Liquidium, I don't know if we're going to build it or if another company is going to build it on top of our SDKs or whatever, is a Bitcoin credit card that where essentially you fund that credit card with Bitcoin, and then that Bitcoin that's on the credit card earns yield for you. And when you spend with that credit card, instead of selling your Bitcoin, it takes a loan against your Bitcoin in stable coins and then settles with Visa or settles with MasterCard. And then you can repay that loan whenever you want to. That way, essentially, you can have a credit card that is loaded up with Bitcoin. You never spend a single Satoshi. You just kind of like tap it and spend fiat that you're borrowing against your Bitcoin in real time. And then you can repay whenever you want to. That's a use case that I see that I really want to have with Liquidium. I think it would be awesome. I would use it every day, honestly. And I think many others would too. And then for institutions, I think they will probably just like borrow large amounts of money against their Bitcoin to kind of like use that in other opportunities that they might see. Like, for example, if they need to let's say if they are purchasing a company, or if they are investing into like a huge R&D project or whatever it might be, and they don't really want to get rid of their Bitcoin holdings, then they would probably borrow against that, just to kind of like leverage more and keep getting more money. Or even kind of like a Michael Saylor strategy, where you just want to almost like leverage on Bitcoin, and you can just use your Bitcoin as collateral, borrow stable coins against that, and then buy more Bitcoin. That's also something you can do. And effectively, you can run that loop as often as you want. Like you can borrow $80 worth of stable coins against $100 worth of Bitcoin, and then buy more Bitcoin with that, borrow stable coins against it again, buy more Bitcoin, and effectively that way you can like leverage your Bitcoin, and kind of like if Bitcoin is on a run, you can really maximize your gains from that Bitcoin. Obviously, always there is a risk with that, which is liquidation risk. So you don't want to over leverage, of course, but there are a lot of opportunities that you can do with it. It kind of like goes again to the same core principle. It's a very simple tool. It's a very simple mechanic, and you can do a lot of different things with it, probably more than I can even think of right now.
Okay. Yeah, the looping's interesting, and I do foresee a lot of people doing that, a lot of companies doing that. They're like, okay, great, now we have cash, what do we do with it? Let's buy more Bitcoin. So last point I want to touch on is something you mentioned was in the credit card example, people are able to earn yield on their Bitcoin. Are you guys seeing many yield products be created, or what are you seeing in the market for yield?
So I guess right now the market is still limited when it comes to real yield. I think you kind of have to differentiate between real yield and synthetic real yield, or whatever you want to call it. Something like a Babylon or a Core or whatever, they pay on paper very high interest rates on your Bitcoin, but it doesn't actually give you more Bitcoin. It gives you their token, and then obviously, yes, you can sell that token to Bitcoin, but it's like not really the same as if I would just like actually earn Bitcoin yield on my Bitcoin. And I think that is still pretty much untapped space right now. I actually don't know of any non-custodial platform that currently yields you, or that currently gives you a native Bitcoin yield that is real yield, except Liquidium WTF, and soon Liquidium Fi. Yeah, it's kind of like an untapped space that makes a lot of sense, because who doesn't want to earn more Bitcoin on their Bitcoin?
Yep. Yeah, agreed. I think it's also essential for the adoption of Bitcoin as like a reserve currency. Ray Dalio in a podcast recently was talking about like if the dollar keeps on its trajectory, hyperinflation, and the world is looking for a different reserve currency, like what are the options? And the options are, we can go to the Chinese yuan, maybe the Swiss franc, that's done well, or Bitcoin. Very, very logically, Bitcoin is an option. I think Brian Armstrong is also starting to attest to that. He's like, yeah, I think Bitcoin will be the reserve currency if we continue as we are. But what's essential for a reserve currency is that you can park it somewhere and get like a decent amount of yield on it. Right now with the dollars, that comes in the form of treasuries. That's the risk-free rate. But it's a bit harder with Bitcoin. So long-winded way to say I agree with you that yield's important. There aren't many native yield options except for what you guys are providing. But I do think that's almost like the essential puzzle piece to figure out for Bitcoin to really move forward as a stored of value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess like right now it's still like the amount of yield that you get on your Bitcoin is probably still like if everybody would put their Bitcoin on Liquidium, I think the amount of yield that it would produce would be quite small. just because right now there is not a lot of, like probably there is not a huge amount of borrowing need for Bitcoin per se. So people borrowing Bitcoin. I think right now most people are interested in borrowing stable coins against Bitcoin, but there is not so many people who are borrowing Bitcoin. Obviously with Liquidium WTF, we have seen that people want to borrow Bitcoin, especially in the ordinal space, especially in the Bitcoin DeFi space. People need Bitcoin to operate. And the more we see Bitcoin maturing and becoming a currency, becoming a legal tender in countries, becoming a cryptocurrency that you can actually use in DeFi and so on, the more need there will be for borrowing Bitcoin, because that will now be the liquidity. Versus right now, stablecoins are the liquidity. And I think that will shift over time. And then there will be more borrowing needs for Bitcoin, and therefore interest rates for borrowing Bitcoin will go up, and therefore lenders will earn more interest on their Bitcoin. But yeah, I don't see, like, if you look at Aave, for example, Aave has over $5 billion in wrapped Bitcoin right now. Like over $5 billion are locked on Aave in wrapped Bitcoin, which is a huge amount of money. And the current yield for that is 0.02% per year.
That's crazy.
Because who in the world would borrow wrapped Bitcoin? Nobody would borrow wrapped Bitcoin. But there is a market for borrowing native Bitcoin. That's what I think. Because native Bitcoin is something that you can actually use in Bitcoin DeFi. That is something that you can actually use for paying for your pupusas in El Salvador, and so on and so forth. So I think there is a much greater need for borrowing Bitcoin than there is for borrowing wrapped Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is actually something that you can use.
Last question for you here. What's the biggest setback or failure that you've had at Liquidium, and what did you learn from it going forward?
That's a good question, and I need to think about that. I wouldn't say it's a setback or anything like that. I think it's more like a missed opportunity, which is I think I did the right call with, like, there were so many like layer 2s and whatever on Bitcoin, and I always said no. I want to keep our stuff on native Bitcoin. I think the only one where I kind of faded them, and now kind of looking back at it, seeing why it makes sense, is Odin Fun, which is right now, if you look at the ordinals and rune space, they are doing the most volume right now.
Yep.
Compared to Magic Eden, and I know in the Western market, not a lot of people are using Odin Fund, but I was in Hong Kong right now for Bitcoin Asia, and the amount of people using Odin Fund there is absolutely gigantic. And I think it's a very different target, like a very different audience. I think it's mostly people that use Bitcoin as almost like they like to gamble with it. And I didn't know that people will gamble with Bitcoin. I always thought that other cryptocurrencies will be the gambling currencies, but Odin Fund did it. Like they did Bitcoin gambling, and I didn't see that market coming. But I guess that's just what happens, and I'm very happy for Bob. I have known him for a long time. He's an amazing builder, a very smart guy, and I like him a lot, and I really support what he's doing. Actually, Odin Fund is also built on ICP, which is cool. So yeah, maybe you'll see something coming with Odin Fund at some point.
I love it. I love Bob too. He's a great guy. It's so nice, so responsive. So yeah, maybe there's a future where Liquidium's allowing you to do some super degen leverage within Odin.
Won't tell anything yet.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. Well, Robin, thanks for hopping on the pod here. Great chatting with you as always. Yeah, any last words that you want to share with the audience here?
Check out Liquidium if you're into Bitcoin DeFi. I think even if you're not necessarily interested in borrowing and lending, just give it a shot to see what you can do with Bitcoin. I think it's always interesting for people that are just in the broader ecosystem to see what Bitcoin can actually do. Because when we started building on Bitcoin, nobody thought that you could build anything like Liquidium on Bitcoin. And I think we builders, like the whole space, has proven all of these doubters wrong, and we showed them that we can build actual applications on Bitcoin. And so if you just want to see what Bitcoin can actually do and what Bitcoin DeFi apps can look like, check out Liquidium.
Awesome. So everyone, get out there, go check out Liquidium, and thank you guys for joining. Until next time.